Hey, what up everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you with the Monday Night War episode review. This was episode 9. It was about the luchadores of WCW. This has been a little bit of a break from the Monday Night War series because they haven't had an episode on, I believe, in 2 weeks. Since late September when they did the Stone Cold Steve Austin episode. And this one, to me, honestly, I don't know. I never was a big luchadors fan. I think if there ever was a luchador that I really liked in WCW, it was Psychosis. I've taken a lot of flack from this over the years. Both of these guys have matches that really stand out to me that are really, really good. I never really was a big Rey Mysterio or Eddie Guerrero fan. I remember being shocked as hell when Eddie Guerrero beat Brock Lesnar for the WWE Championship. I guess that would be the World Heavyweight Championship before WrestleMania 20. That would be No Way Out. 2004, I think is when that would be. I took a little bit of a break from wrestling after WrestleMania 19, and I remember I would always sort of check the dirt sheets, and I would see the WWE magazine at my work, and the magazine section used to be right next to where the time clock was, so I would flip through the magazine, and that was the first time I saw that Eddie Guerrero was going to be challenging Brock Lesnar for the championship, and I still remember laughing at that, just thinking like how funny it was that Eddie Guerrero was going to be in a match to have a chance to win the World Heavyweight Championship, and how much of a squash that must be, that they were just trying to find a way for Brock Lesnar to make it to WrestleMania as a champion and still have a SmackDown exclusive pay-per-view at that time. And I know that a big part of this was talking about how WCW built their fan base, about how Eric Bischoff went out and found these guys who wrestled for AAA, who wrestled for New Japan, just basically went out and took a little bit from everywhere and brought it in. The only problem that I have with how they put this together, saying that Eric Bischoff was the genius that built Monday Nitro, was if you go back 2 episodes to the Monday Night War episode 7 was about ECW. It was entitled "The War Goes Extreme." They just made Paul E. look like he was the genius of the wrestling world that built the Attitude Era by saying that he was the one who went out and did this. And Eric Bischoff basically was the burglar who snuck in the back door and offered these guys larger contracts with more money that brought them from ECW, bringing them to WCW. So how can Bischoff be the genius that went out and scouted these people if 2 weeks ago you said that Paul Lee was the genius who brought these guys in? This one was sort of like the who's who of WWE stars who were involved in WCW, talking about what was going on. You saw Chris Jericho was a big part of this. Rey Mysterio was one of the big talking heads. Honestly, I'm a little bit embarrassed. And it's just one of those things when talking about wrestling deaths that it just pops in your mind every once in a while. I kept wondering why the hell they kept having Vicky Guerrero talk about what was going on when things were going down involving Eddie Guerrero. And I can honestly say that I forgot that Eddie Guerrero had passed on and we had lost him. And that sort of hit me as sort of a sad spot. And I know I said earlier that I was never one of the biggest Eddie Guerrero fans, but it's always sad, when you lose one of those guys. And that's probably one of the first moments that I've ever forgot that Eddie's not around anymore. One of the guys that I can never really forget or never remember is Lance Cade. Lance Cade was a guy that I thought had a huge bright spot in wrestling, and every once in a while I find myself thinking about my favorite tag teams and thinking about Murdoch and Cade and wondering why they just don't ever reunite and find some spot they can wrestle in. It sucks. I mean, that's just a part of wrestling these days. Guys pass on too young, and that's a bad thing. I can honestly say that it was fun watching the WCW spots that they picked out. Jushin Thunder Liger going up against Brian Pillman on the first edition in the first match of WCW Monday Nitro. Something that I'm sure a lot of people have gone and checked out, thinking that it would be fun to watch a lot of the Nitros from back in the past. I'm sure that's one of the most seen matches on the WWE Network these days. Everybody going and checking out the WCW stuff. But They talked about, Halloween Havoc 97, Rey Mysterio going up against Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko coming in and wrestling a lot of matches, and a lot of guys talking about how great they were. One of my favorite lines came from Daniel Bryan, just talking about how, the WCW luchadores and the cruiserweights were the backbone of WCW, and it was the reason why he, fell in love with watching WCW. He was watching every show, and he was naming shows that I didn't even know they had, from the Saturday show to WCW Pro. He wasn't just talking about, WCW Monday Nitro, which is a lot of guys always say, because it was the flagship show. That was the one that they always watch. It seemed like, Daniel Bryan was a guy that was watching anything and everything that WCW put out there, because he really connected to these wrestlers. And, he had a line where he said that, these were the guys that I connected with because I loved wrestling. They were wrestlers. There was guys out there that, you could fall in love with their storylines, with the NWO, with, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, Hollywood Hulk Hogan. They were performers. They were the actors of the deal. They went out there and they wrestled matches, but these guys wrestled, really wrestled. And, that was fun. One of my favorite things was showing the progression of where these guys went to. And, some of the biggest things happened for these WCW luchadors. One was, Chris Jericho saw the writing on the wall that basically, WCW was never going to push him. He was never going to be a factor in the game because, they fell in love with the NWO. And NWO never found that second story to go through. Yes, the progression of the NWO in 1996, maybe even you can say 1997, going into the Sting match, was great. But when Sting beat Hogan, maybe you do a return match. But that should have been the death of the NWO. But instead, it keeps going. They try to involve it where they go into, doing the NWO Wolfpack, where the NWO splits, and now you have WCW, then you've got the Wolfpack, which is sort of, they're good guys that are sort of bad guys, and they're fighting for the support of WCW, but they're not with WCW. And then there's the NWO, who hates the Wolfpack at the same time they hate WCW. I've always thought of, the NWO being the baby faces of the whole company. Basically, anybody who was a WCW fan knew that WCW was the second bananas, and they came in telling the truth. WCW sucked, and they were there to change it. And they were the guys who really stepped up to the plate, and they were the guys that fixed it to make it the number one wrestling company in the world. There was one reason why, people were flipping over, because they heard the things that Hollywood Hogan and the NWO were doing, and that was a hot thing in wrestling. But it was the guys like Dean Malenko and Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Chris Jericho, and that, those good, exciting wrestling matches that kept them hooked from jumping over to Monday Night Raw. But, Jericho really saw that, they kept running with this NWO storyline, and that he was never going to be anywhere. So he gave his notice, and his contract ended. WWF was glad to jump on him, and they brought him in, and you can tell right from the beginning that he was going to be a star. It did take him a while to become, a WWE, main eventer. I think the plans were for him to come in and be there, but he didn't really adapt to the WWE style. And then, of course, you can think of the Jericho and Triple H podcast that just came out, where they explained the amount of heat that a lot of the wrestlers had with Jericho, because he was coming in from an outside organization, and they weren't wanting to give him a lot because he wasn't there to see, them take down WCW with their product. They thought he was just some guy that jumped over from the sinking ship and was just glad to be in a winning situation, and they felt like they shouldn't be sharing those winnings with him, pretty much. But they show the moment at I can't remember that name of that place, where Jericho wins the WWE Championship on Monday Night Raw, only for, Hebner to come out, and he gets the big pop. And, of course, then he would go on to actually win the championship for real, I believe, at Vengeance. Then he would go on to be in the main event of WrestleMania, and Jericho became a huge star. And then another thing was basically Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Perry Saturn, and Dean Malenko were all fed up a little bit later, seeing the success that Jericho had. Basically, Russo was kicked out. Kevin Sullivan was made head booker. I think everybody in the world knows the heat that Benoit and Sullivan have over basically the divorce and him stealing his wife. And they just saw that they were not going to be going anywhere because they weren't in favor of who was going to be in charge of the booking committee, even though they tried to swing and show Chris that, we want you here. We want you to be one of us. They had him beat Sid in the main events of a pay-per-view, making him the WCW champion. He still shows up on Nitro, relinquishes the championship, not on camera, but off camera. And then 2 weeks later, he shows up on WWE, a part of their company, and is jumping DX. That becomes the Revolution was their name when they were in WCW. Now they were the... Crap! I can't remember what their name was in WWE. But they come over. Of course, Chris Benoit becomes the easy main eventer. Eddie Guerrero is the guy that everybody loves, who becomes European champion. And he would have to wait a long time to get that main event spot that he knew would be his if he worked hard. But that was one of the fun things about this, was, relinquishing how WCW tried to make Eddie Guerrero a main eventer. They dangled that carrot in front of him, like they were going to be pushing him to that spot. They had him in a feud with Eric Bischoff. I remember Bischoff coming out and cutting these shoot promos on him about, if Eddie Guerrero wants his release, it's the power of the pen. And he would wave this pen in front of the camera that he was going to release him. And if Eric was going to release him, let him get released. I mean, the LWO, I don't know. I mean, everybody knows from watching the Eddie Guerrero documentary that basically they thought they were going somewhere, but from somebody who was watching WCW at the time, it didn't really seem like they were going anywhere. All the cruiserweights reunited, but they were having matches against each other, which made no sense. And then when Eddie got hurt from his car crash, basically everybody stopped wearing the LWO gear, but Rey Mysterio kept wearing it. He was the one guy who had to get beat to be put into the group, but now Eddie's gone and he doesn't want to take it off. And I don't know, that whole deal was a mess. And I've met Rey Mysterio twice, and I've wanted to ask him both times about that, and I always sort of just forget, I guess, at the last minute. But I sort of like how this ended. And, the beginning part was sort of fun to watch because of the matches. I wouldn't rank this as one of the best. It's not the NWO one. It's not one of the worst. But it's part of the series. I mean, it's episode 9. You got 11 more coming. And, there's a lot more stuff coming to the WWE Network. I had a lot of fun tonight. I watched the main event before I watched this. Hopefully you guys will check out that as well. And we'll see you down the road. Peace out.